Hello, my name is Aidan Artymiuk, and I played the role of Broadfoot and Kingston in Vindictus. I got involved in this Facebook, actually. Yeah, I'm a member of the Facebook page for the Vindictus book, and which I joined a little while ago because I'm a Blake 7 fan, and I was just surfing around, and I came across it, joined it, and shortly afterwards I bought the book, greatly enjoying it. A lot of fun. It's a great story, a great continuation. I certainly prefer it to some of the other ones that exist out there for the show. As a point of order, it's actually a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, the way the show ended. Not least because it wasn't meant to end that way. It was intended to continue on, but the BBC, for whatever reason, didn't renew it, whatever, so that was it, which is why the late great Paul Darrow was always trying to get involved and get something going again with it. Unfortunately, he never did before his untimely death, which is a great shame. Still, we have Big Finish's stuff, so that's something. What's memorable for me in this story? Interestingly enough, a lot of my most memorable parts happen in the other parts, which is what I will say is it's interesting that they made Villa and Tarrant the focuses of the previous characters, the previous crew from the show, because normally when you do things, it's usually Avon who's paired with Villa, but not Tarrant and Villa. Which is good, because Tarrant and Villa played off each other very well in the show, and it's great to see that Tarrant is still looking out for him, because despite everything, they do still care about each other, and it's just nice to see, and it's nice that they finally get off Gouda Prime decades later, and that they are able to continue their fight. Villa not really that interested in it, but Tarrant very much is, which is good to see, because Tarrant always thought a person who didn't seem like someone who would just give up, and he would want to keep going on fighting and not just end on Gouda Prime, which would not be a good end for anyone. I also like that in the story they do mention that Avon was gone when Tarrant and Villa woke up, because some interesting ideas for sequel material later on, which I hope they do. I very much hope that they continue with this. It's certainly the best continuation that I've seen. I think I've already said, but I repeat myself. My characters are pretty bit characters, which is absolutely fine. This has just been an honour to take part in any way, and I would love to do more stuff with Vindictus in the future and with any of the people involved in this. I will say though, it's interesting that the bit players, in a sense, one of the ones I play sets the whole thing in motion, which is actually quite funny, really, because Broadfoot is just looking around doing a security chief, and he just happens to see this and shows initiative and report it rather than just letting it pass, which in the Federation isn't necessarily always rewarded. So it's nice to see that he did that. And it would be interesting for him to come back later, I think, just to see what he's doing in the Federation now and what his views of it are. It would certainly be interesting if he ended up turning on them, I think, because, he's not necessarily blind to it, but to what the sort of things that the Federation does. But most people in these sort of societies believe they can't do anything about it, and it takes someone to shake them out of their revere to show them that they can do something. It's just, you have to be prepared that bad things might happen to you. I'll tell you the funny thing about it. The most difficult thing for me during this whole recording was when it came to playing Kingston. I had to put on a different accent. I had to alter my voice, and I am trained as an actor, but that was still difficult because I also had to cut off some of the static on my microphone. So to do that, I had to bring a chair into my room, put it on my bed, put the quilt over the bed, and move the microphone that is still connected to the computer in there, and sort of crouch down on my knees and lean forward because I've got to keep the quilt slightly up so I can see the lines that I'm supposed to say. So that was amusing. I hope that a lot of voice actors don't have to do that, because it must be murder on their knees. It must be. So yes, this has been great fun to do, and I hope to see more from the future. I hope that I'm involved more in the future. And one last thing, I did ask whether they'd be interested in me doing an interview for this, because my role was so small. I wasn't sure if they'd want it, but I received an email saying, yes, we'd love you to do that. And your perseverance during it all was humbling, and I thought that was very nice, which is me giving a thumbs up to them as people. They are very nice, true fans, and it has been a real pleasure doing this. And I hope to be able to talk to you again sometime. Thanks for listening.
My name is Amanda Dolan-Harrison, and I play Semele. How did you become involved in Vindictus? Well, initially I was approached by Neil because we'd had conversations whilst I was reading the book to ask if I would be interested at all in auditioning for a part in the upcoming Vindictus audio. I really wasn't sure, and so I sat on it for a while and mulled it over, and then ultimately decided, what on earth have I got to lose? And so I did an audition tape on my phone, not expecting to hear anything further at all. And then in the event, I was offered the part of Semele, which was a delight and also a bit of a scary prospect too. Yeah, it was just quite exciting. The eagle-eared will know that Semele does not appear in the story until part 2, but you do hear me as Zira and also as one of the alters. And so as a result, I had to quickly get a mic and get sorted out, because I wasn't allowed to do it all on my phone still. And I think that worked. So yeah, that's how I became involved. Would you do more? I have to say that this experience of Vindictus Audio has given me a deep appreciation of folk who do voice acting for a living. Whatever you may believe listening, it's harder than you think, especially when recording in isolation without other cast members to bounce off of. As a result, I have to say kudos and much deserved respect goes to Chrisi Pashley for fitting this all together beautifully and making it work. She's an absolute Blake 7-star and should be recognised as such, so round of applause and big cheers for Chrisi. Would I do more though? You betcha. Looking back, I've actually really rather enjoyed the experience, and I'm very happy that I agreed to send the audition tape off and got the part and have been involved in what has been just a huge labour of love for all involved. And I guess I'd like to thank Neil and Noella for allowing me to bring one of their babies to the ears of the nation, even if I did change the pronunciation of her name. Sorry about that.
Hello, my name's Chrisi Pashley, and I played Alta 1, the Supreme Imperator, or the SI, and Aurak in the Vindictus audio. How did I become involved in Vindictus? I've been making audio dramas for a little while now, since about 2021, and I had made audio stories from the Forever Avon anthology. From there, I then got involved in the Cult Edges annual 2023, where there were several stories that I made. And from there moved on to Scorpio Tales, and from there moved on to Thieves, Killers, Mercenaries and Psychopaths. And when I did some of the Scorpio Tales stories, I posted them in the normal manner, like I put them on. I was working with another actor at that time, and some of the stories got posted on Twitter. And I'm pretty certain on memory that's when I had my first conversation with Neil Shearer, who is the one of the authors for Vindictus. He said we had a conversation. I think we were just talking generally, and I think he might have mentioned to me he had 2 stories in TKMP, one of which was like a teaser for Vindictus, but the other was actually a story in its own right. And I said, well, you want me to make it into an audio? I probably said some flippant thing like that. Anyway, so we ended up making that story with a cast of about 5 actors, actually. Both Neil and Lou had their own part. So that was really cool. And I, again, because I'm so stupid, I made another flippant comment saying, oh, you should let me make Vindictus. And I think his first comment on that was, oh, that would be a major undertaking. Well, no shit, Sherlock, as we now know. Anyhow, that's how I got involved with Vindictus. I did buy 2 copies of the book when it first was released. I have 2 hard copies. Well, at the time, I tended to ruin the one that I was making the audios for, so I bought 2 copies of it. So yeah, that's how I got involved. What are the most memorable parts of this story for you? Well, that's a hard question for me because I've had multitudes of different avenues of involvement in this. I think the whole thing, really, not to be cliched, but really the whole experience is the most memorable part for me. From the point of view of learnings, I've learned a lot about script editing. I've learned a lot about working with other voice actors. I had worked with a couple before, but I'm just new to this, like everybody really. And I think you have to adapt on the fly. Working with other voice actors is a character study in itself. So not so much studying the characters that you're portraying or they're portraying, but also studying each other and working out, how do I communicate efficiently or effectively with this person to get what I need out of them so they get what they need out of me. So, it's a back and forth thing. I would say the whole thing really it's the biggest thing I've ever made, audio-wise, for sure. If you provided voice, what was your favourite thing about your character? Well, there are there's one character actually in this story that didn't exist in the series, and that is the Supreme Imperator, which is I saw it as almost like a more forceful Servalan, if you like, but not Servalan. Nothing like Servalan, but I was thinking Servalan when I voiced it, and then it doesn't end up sounding like that because it's a mechanical voice. But I tried to execute some of her forthrightness in my execution of that character. It doesn't have a massive part in this section, but that's what I tried to bring it. It was basically an unquestioned authority, that character. It was good to play. I like playing computers. What does that say about me? Don't answer that. The second character was Outer One. This character only had 1 section, 1 paragraph to read, and I basically tried to emulate Sheila Ruskin throughout, who was the original Outer One. I added effects to this voice, to all the outer voices actually, to give them a robotic emulation, but not, they were read by different people, and that's good because we want different voices going on here. But I tried to think of it in that the original 2 outers didn't sound the same; they sounded quite different. But they didn't even have any voice effects on. So the one that I did, I added the voice effects to take away the fact that it was my voice because I'm doing the narration. But I also thought Sheila Ruskin while I was reading it. And the last one is Aurak, who is one of my favourite characters of the entire thing. I wouldn't say I'm the best Aurak out there, but I do it my way. And basically I think it works. I do enjoy reading Aurak, and perhaps that comes across in the portrayal. I hope so, anyway. What was the most difficult part of your role in this audio, and what did you learn? Well, I learnt a lot about perseverance. So I've already talked about technical things that I learned. Every time I make an audio, I learn something new. And I was able to bring a lot of learnings I've had from other audios into this one. And I have a big stock of sound effects and things that I can reuse, but I also have to still go looking for sound effects. So every time I make one, my library of sound effects gets bigger. And I learn how to make them as well. So I had to make quite a few sounds from scratch for this. So the most difficult part probably was keeping the faith. Yeah, new souls for the faith. I think it's quite easy to be excited about something. It's quite difficult to maintain momentum with it. But if I could say one thing about me, it's that I'm quite stubborn. And if I commit to something, I want to see it through. And if I can't see it through, then I'm going to be very upset and very disappointed. So when I committed to Neil and Luella, I didn't want them to think, well, she's just a fly-by-nighter. And effectively, we're all operating remotely, and we could disappear just like that, and no one would actually know what happened to us because we're not living anywhere near each other. Most of us have not met each other, which is quite a bizarre concept, isn't it? So I wanted to be sure that they had faith and they understood that I was in it for the long run. I'm not going to disappear. I'm not going to be, challenging them to the point that it's unreasonable or any of that. I wanted to work with them because I think that the book is worth it, and I like the story, and I thought it would be great as an audio, and I think I'm right. So if you don't think I'm right, why don't you send me a message? You can find me on Twitter as India Ray. I would be interested to hear your thoughts. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the first part of this audio. There's another 2 parts coming. And even though it's very, very hard work, I really am relishing the challenge. Thank you for listening.
My name is Emma Reid, emusing Emma if you know me online, and I'm playing Commissioner Lamia in Vindictus. As a long-term fan of Blake 7, I'd volunteered to go on the Federation's Most Wanted podcast with B7 Gaming, and almost immediately I got a message from Neil saying I didn't sound like he'd expected, and then a few hours after that asking if I'd be interested in getting involved with the Vindictus audio, which was really quite a surprise. I tried out for a couple of parts and it was pretty nerve-wracking as I hadn't acted other than in a few little sketches in front of my class when I was in primary school. But I think it was the chief baddie that Neil had me in mind for from the start, and I'm really not sure what that says about my performance on the podcast. Maybe I was a bit scary. I did really rather enjoy the bit where Lamia was lusting after Space Commander Arik. Sorry, Ian. And when I was reading the book, I kept trying to work out if Orak was deliberately trying to get a new crew together or if it was just its self-preservation tendencies at work. So it was quite interesting trying to figure that as I was going along. I really enjoyed that Lamia was so manipulative and seductive. I'm not sure that I'm either of these in real life, but it really was fun to play. The first and most difficult part of the role was actually having the confidence to do it in the first place, having never done anything like this before. After I recorded part 1, I kept waiting for a message saying, no, that was terrible, you need to do it all again, or saying that you'd decided on somebody else's, I was so bad. The most difficult line I had was when my character had to chuckle slightly as she spoke. As I was describing my difficulty doing this to my colleagues at work, they said, but you're doing it right now. However, it's much harder when you're sitting alone in your spare room recording with nobody there to amuse you. Oh, and the whole thing of never wanting to listen to the sound of my own voice, which is something I've had to kind of work on getting over. And the fact that I never seem to be able to say the word Federation without stumbling, which my character does have to say quite a bit. Yes, I would do more, and in fact I already am. Matt McGuinness, who plays Tarrant, has a YouTube show called The Show, and I'm going to be voice acting in that, a character called Pandora, which I would never have had the confidence to go for if I hadn't already got the part in Vindictus. So yeah, I'm open to any more opportunities that may come my way.
My name's Ian Banks. I played Commander Arik, although given that it's Blake 7, I should properly be addressed as Space Commander Arik. I became involved in Vindictus through the novel's Facebook page. The authors put out a call for people who might be interested in playing a part in an audio retelling of the novel and being a lifelong Blake 7 fan as well as a lifelong amateur actor, I immediately put my hand up for it. I really enjoyed the novel of Vindictus. It retold the story of Blake 7 for a new generation, and what I particularly loved about it was the way that it rhymed with Series A, in that we met the characters gradually and they became a somewhat reluctant team just as gradually aboard a similarly advanced craft going up against a similarly formidable foe. What I liked about playing Commander Arik was that I don't think he's as awful as Travis was. He's certainly as ruthless and can be as vicious and as callous, but I don't think he's as inhumane as Travis was. He definitely sees his opponents as pieces on a board that are to be eliminated. He doesn't see them as fellow human beings simply because they're not on his side. And so I think he's got a little bit more integrity than Travis did, while still sharing his frustration with bureaucracy and ineffectual leadership. The challenging part of playing Arik was not making him that cardboard cutout of Travis. He definitely is his own person. I think he would view Travis as a renegade and somebody who needed to be dealt with. But I think he would possibly sympathize with a lot of Travis's views, despite very much being a part of the establishment that would look down on somebody like Travis. I'd be interested in seeing if Arik's antagonism towards our heroes goes further than Travis's did. Travis was very much an opponent of Blake, and when Blake left the series, there wasn't really much call for Travis anymore. So I'm kind of hoping that, should this series continue, that Arik would become more of a reliable and regular opponent, much as Servalan did in the original series, because I don't think that, given the right circumstances, much could stop Lamia and Arik, and I'd be keen to find out if that's the case.
Hi, my name's Martin Clothier, and I played Villa and Zedan. I became involved in Vindictus, firstly as a reader, struck up a friendship online with Neil, and Neil one day asked if I knew anyone who might want to play Villa in a audio version of him and Lou's short story that went into Thieves, Mercenaries, Killers and Psychopaths that was done by Colt Edge. A friend of mine did that for them, but he didn't have time to do any more Villa, as he's a bit of a thesp and, busy chap. So Neil came back to me and said, do you fancy having a crack at it? So I thought, why not? And I've always had a bit of an affinity for Villa, and so here I am. I think the most memorable part of the story for me, there are a couple of bits actually. I find Ensor quite creepy. I think the part of the book where he is squirreling away those dead altars on the Vindictus is really creepy. He's going to go and do an autopsy on them, and that's just, kind of creepy. At first, he kind of reminded me of Avon a little bit. Obviously, there are similarities in the profile of the character a bit, I guess, but actually, he's a very different character when you get under the covers of him, I think. Very, very creepy. Also, one bit that's not really in the story that I quite enjoyed doing as well is Villa's immediate reaction to waking up after the Gouda Prime massacre as well, which was interesting to do. I'm not an actor, let me just say. I'm just a fan like anybody else. So, but kind of doing this stuff is opening my eyes to possibilities of doing more, and it's been a great part to play and great to be part of the process. I think the favourite thing for me about being Villa and catching up with Villa 30 years later after Blake has been that he's still very much the same old Villa. The thief, the skilled thief, the cowardly drunk, whatever you want to call him. He's really none of those things. He's actually a very heroic character, I think, under the surface, and we get to see a bit more of that. But he's tired, you know. His life has been pretty awful, really. I think there's a scene. Gosh, is it in Sand? There's a scene where they refer back to life on the Liberator and Callie's death, and he gets quite upset about it. You know, what do you know about any of that? I think he says. And I think that Villa comes through a little bit in Vindictus as well. And he does bond a little bit with Lou Blake. And you can see that old kind of faith in Blake and the original Blake that he has grow a little bit over the course of the series. And it was weird because I was reading the parts of the book where Villa's kind of story arc in the book closes out, at the same time as watching Hostage. So all those bits with Inga, etc., in Hostage were really fresh in my mind, and that really helped because I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of the series or anything, to be honest. But that was really cool to see at the same time. So the most difficult thing about being in this audio, I think, is trying to kind of pick up on the little nuances of Villa that we would recognise from the series and sort of portray those. You know, you're not trying to do an impersonation of Michael Keating, but you're trying to be kind of true to the character. So I've tried to make him... He wasn't really ever the comedy relief in Blake 7, although Dudley Simpson's music would kind of have you think otherwise, I think, sometimes. But trying to keep him in that kind of... He was always kind of flippant and light-hearted and more the most jovial one of them all, really, wasn't he? So trying to keep that alive and be true to the character as much as possible for a completely untrained newbie voice actor has been quite difficult, but I hope I pulled it off. People can let us know in the comments on wherever the Vindictus audio gets published. You know, if it's on YouTube, reach out. We'd love to hear from you, I'm sure. Would I do more? I think the answer to that is definitely yes. I've enjoyed it. It hasn't been too much of a strain to fit into my everyday life. It's been quite weird. I need to put a red light above my bedroom because people do tend to bust into the room even though I've told them I'm going to record. So hopefully Chrisi, who's been pulling this whole thing together and editing it, hasn't heard too much of my family moving around in the background. But yes, I definitely do more. And actually, this has already led on to me doing some more audio stuff with another podcast, which has been really interesting. I've had my own writing turned into audiobooks before by a kind of professional narrator through the Audible platform. So it was interesting sort of being in their shoes and kind of doing that job, albeit unpaid, but, you know, we do it for love. These are works of passion that we get involved in as fans, aren't they? So, yeah, it's been a really good experience, and I definitely do more. And, you know, I'd love to be more involved in the fan community, and as I've said elsewhere. So, yeah, I'd like to say thanks to Neil and Lou and Chrisi and everybody. It'd be great if we could all get together as a cast at some point and have a beer, wouldn't it? Let's do that. Let's have a Vindictus convention. Why don't we, huh? Anybody?
Hello, my name is Matt McGuinness, known on social media and things like that as Quad Matter, and I played Tarrant in Vindictus. I became involved in Vindictus indirectly, I guess, is probably the best way of putting it. So, for a bit of context, I had written a review of it. I had seen the advertising for the book on Twitter specifically, and thought, oh, this might be worth checking out. So I followed the account. I ordered the book, I read it in a day, because I'm a fast reader, and I posted a review of it onto a blog that I post stuff on every now and then, called Does It Matter? Neil read it, he sent it to Lou. Apparently, they had misconstrued me being balanced in the criticism of it as me being negative, which I then had to edit the review to actually mention explicitly the fact that I did enjoy it. Although they did accept that anyway. So they published the review to the website, and I thought that would be it. Until a couple of weeks later, I got effectively a knock on the door, a metaphorical knock on the door in DM saying, would you like to be a voice actor for the audio adaptation? Little did I know that I had been indirectly referred by somebody else to do it, and after a couple of tests for different characters, they asked me would I like to do Tarrant. Tarrant was difficult in the sense that, as you can probably tell, I am a younger individual, I'm 20, and Tarrant is in his 50s. And also, I do not have a British accent. I have the Northern Ireland standard. Go Belfast, I guess. So, it was difficult for me to adopt something remotely resembling Stephen Pacey, but I think I got kind of close, I guess. I don't know. Tarrant himself was interesting because the way that he got on, you could tell that everything on Gouda Prime and the stuff from Series D really affected him. And particularly, he did lash out a wee bit because he did feel bitter about what happened, the shootout and all that. The continuity as well, that's what really stuck with me. Yeah, that makes sense. That ties in with this episode, this ties in with that. It did feel like it was drawing on lots and lots of different episodes. Like, there were all sorts of callbacks to every series, I think. Maybe, perhaps not Series C as much, but I definitely felt like Vindictus took the best from all the series and combined them into a product that reflects a canonical continuation. So yeah, that stood out to me, really. I think my favourite thing about Tarrant, really, is that he is older, he is gruffer, so the events, as I said, the events of Gouda Prime really have affected him, and he is more than a little bit hesitant to immediately assume that everything will be fine, everything will be alright, as well as the fact that it is an extension of the Tarrant we know. I would say he leans slightly more into Series C territory with how gruff he can get and how abrasive he is at points, but there are moments of the Series D Tarrant in there as well where the compassionate side of him comes out. And it was really fun, like, trying to get the balance between those when I was doing it. It was a lot of fun getting that. The most difficult part of voicing Tarrant by far was the accent, because, as stated, I do not have a British accent. Or, well, I don't have the Rada accent. I can put it on, like this, and I have for other projects. Specifically, the character of Omega in my own series, The Show, uses this voice. So for Tarrant, it was a case of putting it back on again. Taking what I was already able to do and use it in a different context. But it's difficult because there's some words in there that I would pronounce one way, but that accent would demand that you voice it a different way. Like, any words beginning with ah, that was difficult because I didn't know, should I pronounce it with, like, sort of ah or a, because my accent sort of dictates you kind of need to lean more into a lot of the time. So yeah, pronunciation was a challenge. I think I overcame it. I think. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I think I did. And yeah, I'd do more if given the opportunity. I would like to voice Tarrant and other things. Don't know if I will, but I'd love to do more. It's been great fun recording for Vindictus, and I would definitely do it again. It's been a fun time. I know, even though I haven't heard the other people's deliveries, I know that they'll bring great things to the table, and I think that, I've brought the best that I could to Tarrant. I think I've done a sort of faithful Tarrant. It's not Stephen Pacey, But then again, it doesn't have to be Stephen Pacey. It's the character I was aiming for, not the actor, so yeah. Alright. Thanks for having me on. I'm going to miss doing this. Goodbye.
My name is Neil Shearer, and the main character I play in the Vindictus audio is Zach Ensor. Oh, and I also voiced the officious GP official, which warns anyone who approaches Gouda Prime of their need to provide the codes. I became involved in Vindictus at the very beginning because I co-wrote it. So yes, my involvement has been rather full on all the way through the journey of creating firstly the novel and now also creating the audio. And that's been a very challenging process, but a good process, an enjoyable process, whereby we had to adapt the novel itself to make it more friendly for the medium of audio. So there was heavy editing of the novel to make it fit for purpose. Most memorable parts, I'm going to say, are all of them. Because I think it's really good. I think I like the way that the new characters mingled in with the two older characters that we've got there. Standout moments for me from writing, there are so many, but I'm going to say Tarrant and Villa's rather squalid existence on Gouda Prime. I can still smell the room inside their troop transport or whatever it is, I can't remember, that they live in. That was very graphic. Rather grim and graphic as well is the Federation's work, if you want to call it that, and kind of sauce. I just think that's pure evil. And it shows that this Federation right now is as bad, if not worse, than anything that came before. I think that Ensor is an interesting character, and knowing what I know about him, and I don't want to give too much away, but with his character background, because Luella and I fleshed out all the main characters, so they've all got rather large biographies and a lot of background info behind them. Ensor is cold, callous, calculating, arguably a little bit inhumane, brinking on being a sociopath, I think, maybe more than brinking, to be honest. The favourite thing about him, I'm not sure he's one of the characters to actually have a favourite thing about, but I think that if I had to say what it was, I think it's just his entirely calculating nature, particularly when he gets rid of Zedan, who takes him to Gouda Prime, his paid pilot. That's just rather chilling, I think. What drives Ensor? He utterly believes that he's entitled to a better, more grandiose living than he currently has, but he also feels that Aurak is his birthright. Of course, being his grandfather's creation. And I guess whilst he's created computers himself and some technology himself, it's another shortcut for Ensor just to acquire Aurak and then acquire all the capabilities of Aurak for whatever it is that Ensor wants to do with them. So yes, I think he likes a good shortcut. He's got a rather high opinion of himself. I think the most difficult part of my role in the audio is constantly underplaying. I think that's the right delivery for this character, and keeping yourself in check and underplaying him, I think, is quite difficult. You see a scene or you read a scene and there's expression, you can imagine how you might react as an individual, and then you have to cut it back and you have to really hone it in, I think. And he's constantly on a level, and I'm trying to achieve that, and so that's the most difficult part. Would I do it again? The overwhelming answer to that is yes, and I've done some other stuff as well with Chrisi as well. We wrote a short story that appeared in the Cult Edge anthology book, Thieves, Killers, Mercenaries, and that was role reversal, and that was set between The Keeper and Star 1 in Season B, and I played Blake there, and I really enjoyed that, and I've done a couple of other roles in some other stuff that Chrisi has yet to release, so yeah, I really enjoy it, and I think I enjoy throwing different voices out there and different interpretations of characters. And would I do it again? Yeah, the resounding answer there is absolutely 100% yes.
Hello, my name is Robert Torres, and I played Barrack, Vindictus Part 1, Prime Directives. I became involved in Vindictus through Facebook, actually. I had joined a fan group that were fans of the series Blake 7. I had heard about this, the publication of Vindictus being a continuation of the series Blake 7, picking up like sometime after the events of the final episode, and I was intrigued. One of the favorite things I had about the character of Barrack is the fact that he's this story's Blake's like right-hand guy, and is also like the pilot and navigator for the ship, and I thought that was actually pretty nice. I think one of the things that drives his character is, wanting to help Blake and obviously wanting to stay alive and just do a good job, and to take down the people who were so brutal, and wanting to take down the Federation, really. The most difficult part in my role, well, at least so far, because we've only just recorded part 1, is really not having more lines. I know that it'll probably come about more in subsequent parts, but I'm so far only just in the one scene, but it's actually really fun, and I am looking forward to doing more. One of the things that I learned, because I've done fan-made audio stuff before, working with Security Kitchen Productions with their adaptations of the Doctor Who novels from the New Adventures, and one of the things I learned was to get better equipment and to take direction more in terms of listening to the advice of the people who are directing and creating, and it's a whole lot of fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing more.
Hello everyone, my name's Chrisi Pashley, and I managed to persuade Neil and Luella to let me make an audio production of their Vindictus novel. So to date, and it's June 2023, we have created or just finished part 1 of the novel, which is a third of it. I just thought I would record my own thoughts on it for those who would like to listen. It's not mandatory, but I like nostalgia. So you can listen to it or not listen to it, up to you. So I just thought I would look at all the different chapters and give my thoughts on what I went through and what happened to create the chapter in its audio form. First of all, Neil and Luella and I had to do quite a lot of work to prepare this book for the audio medium, because the written form and the audio form are quite different, and I think you need to have a slightly simplified dialogue, really, just a bit shorter. And I think we did it quite well. I really do think that Luella and Neil have to be shouted out too for their patience in letting me mess with their story. But at the end of the day, I do hope that they realise I didn't change it, just worked with them to make it more efficient, and hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, the story itself I really liked, actually. People talk a lot about post-Gouda Prime stories, and everyone has an opinion on it. I do enjoy the post-Gouda Prime universe, because it means that it's not over, and that's a nice thing. to get to the story then, what we did first of all is lessened or shortened the prologue quite a bit on memory, about a third of the size of what it is in the book, just because you'll be listening to me, and we don't want to put people off on day one now, do we? So the prologue is quite a bit shorter, and there's a plane coming. This is the bane of my life. Hear that? Yep, that's a plane. So the prologue was written, and I put a bit of audio, part of the audio music piece. So time out. Alan Bell generated a whole bunch of different but aligned original music pieces to go with this, which to me was amazing because I've never had anybody make music specifically for these audios before. So it was really nice to have a similar sort of ilk in the way that the music was generated. And we were able to use those throughout part one of Vindictus. So for the prologue, I just built up a music piece throughout the reading, which got louder and louder, and then added the short version of the theme tune on the end there. And I think it worked quite well. Which then led into chapter 1, which is set in the Federation Communications Unit. And it has these two wonderful, wonderful characters, Broadfoot and Zira, who are everyday working office workers, if you like, of the Federation, I guess, ordinary people. I do like to think of people in this universe as just being normal, not being the villain or not being the hero, just being ordinary people. I love the sort of incidental characters of Blake 7, and I see these two as being those kinds of characters. So Broadfoot, I see him as a sort of technically minded, he's probably like a coder type guy who really knows what he's doing, but he's a back office guy, can't be put in front of anybody, and he's a bit kind of shy and maybe just a little too technical to communicate in a normal manner. And he's stomped all over by Zira, who is most probably a middle-level worker, i.e. sort of almost managerial, but she tries to take a lot of what he's doing and use it to her own advantage. So she's a meanie, but I love the attitude that Amanda brings to her. I mean, when I listen to her, it makes me laugh because she reminds me of people that I worked with when I still lived in England back, when I was much, much younger than I am now. And there were many like that, those that just would demean you or stomp on you, I don't know. And I do like the setting for it because I was able to make it sound quite plausible in that ambience. So yeah, there's the two of those. And then we step straight into the Federation section, or the chapter 2, which is set in Lamia's office. And immediately we are getting to know Lamia, who sounds like quite a gentle person, but we know she's not, right? I guess just the premise of the whole thing, you realise that she's not going to be gentle, but she does have a lovely, endearing, lilting voice, brought beautifully by Emma. And then we have Arik, who comes in, and he's clearly a military type. If it wasn't for the fact that there's a chain of command and he really believes in it, then I don't think he would actually ever be in the same room as Lamia, even though she fancies the hell out of him. That's hilarious. Oh, there's quite a bit of humour like that. Anyway, we'll get to it. When I heard Ian's lines for Arik, he was immediately perfunctory, immediately the commander. I could just believe it. Deliciously aloof. Had this very to-the-point manner, which worked brilliantly, I thought. And you could hear the fact that he resented some part of what he was being asked to do, but it's not clear what, so there's a bit of mystery there, which is, I like that. Sometimes things come and they're unexpected, and that's nice, when you can be surprised like that. I do like the interaction between those two. It's always nice to have the characters talk, but you've got to keep the story on track. And in this part 1 of the story, there's a lot of narrative. And while I think it can be split up and made more interesting, and hopefully that comes across, it can't labour. That can also happen with the characters. So the characters need to remain fresh and interesting and almost bang, bang, bang. You want to hear more from these characters, but we'll stop it before you do hear more. And unfortunately, for the listener, we don't have very much of Lamia or Arik in the first part. It's one of those things. I want more, but there's the others too. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm in a rush to hear everything. So to me, it's just as much of an agony, if indeed you guys are in agony about it. We also hear our first hearing of SI, the Supreme Imperator, which is a computerized voice who is obviously in charge, and Lamia is reporting to. So yes, I guess the SI will come up again later, but it just comes across in voice form only. Then when we get to chapter 3, we move into a completely different part. So we've separated this into 7 sections of part 1. So that's the end of the first section, which is effectively the prologue and the Federation sections. Then we move into the Space World section, where we once again connect with the Outers, and we have about 4 Outers in part 1, which is kind of cool. I like the Outers, and I had a lot of fun making chapters 3 and 4. There's a small section of one of the Outers who is positioned or stationed, if you like, on Planet 2. She's a bit of a sentinel in charge of monitoring and watching space and looking out for threats and things like that. And there's a communications system that they have there, which is, I think, what's going on here is that this system has, in the past 30-odd years, since it was effectively destroyed in inverted commas by the Liberator crew, has recovered, and they are in working order. And it almost seems like they've completely recovered and then gone past where they were, because time will tell that they've rebuilt their environment and they are operational again. One of the Outers is on Planet 2 doing the monitoring, and they report this message from Aurak, because Aurak teasingly sends them a message as well as some of the others, which I think is a very funny twist. Just because it's like, yeah, do your worst. And there's a nice portrayal by Jill here of the Outer, and it's good to have a different voice for each of the Outers, and they're quite separate, I think, in the way that they've been read. So that was really nice to have Jill involved in that. We were able to get Neil's wife, Lisa, to do one short section for one of the Outers. She was like seeing everybody off into the teleport, and she was quite to the point and giving instruction, and I liked the way that she kind of intoned that, sort of schoolmarm. Worked pretty well. And then we moved to Space World itself, which allows me to use some of the, in my mind I had the passageways of that plant that they filmed the actual episode of Redemption, and I think it was a nuclear plant or something. I remember an interview where Jan Chappell was saying, I don't want to go in there because it's nuclear. Back in those days, it would have been much more of an issue than it is these days. So I had in mind those passageways and corridors, and then a big hangar where they've obviously got a space dock almost, but it's a hangar where they're actually maintaining and building these ships. I got in touch with a young student who generates these ambient sounds and scapes. They're amazing. So I used one of her pieces for that, which is a really dramatic background sound. I really love it, and I think it works perfectly for that particular environment. Perhaps I'll get to use it again another time. We will see. Chapters 3 and 4 are both for Space World or Planet 2, and then we move away from the Outers. And I would add as well that there's a music piece for the Federation, which I used in Chapter 2, and these are all music pieces that Alan created for me. And then there's a music piece which represents the Outers, which I used in 3 and 4. And then when we get to Chapter 5, we are moving to Ensor's home planet, or the planet where he is when we first come across him in this story. And that's Morphenial, which is mentioned in the series. That's quite interesting to bring out these original planet names. So he's living on this Morphenial planet. He's a very intelligent young man, and he hears this message from Aurak as well. And through Chapter 5, he goes home to his apartment and he questions his computer, which is amusingly named Arco. Reminds me of the guy from Cygnus Alpha. But whether or not that's what Neil and Lou were thinking, I'm not sure. But to me, that's what it makes me think of. And so what I did with Arco, because Arco is, to my mind, a sort of mediocre version of Aurak, perhaps a child's version of it. I don't know if Neil agrees with this, but I created a background sound for it which was meant to sound rudimentary. It wasn't the sophisticated background sound that Aurak has, and the ticking, which we're all very familiar with. I actually used a child's toy, and I repeated it and used that in place of the ticking and a non-sophisticated background sound. I really like it. Actually, I'm not sure if everyone agrees, but each to their own. So anyway, when it comes to chapter 6, this is one of the first chapters I made, primarily because I was waiting for character input. So this one has Ensor and Zedan and Kingston. Kingston was played by Aidan, and he also actually played Broadfoot. And originally, he did the voice quite similar to Broadfoot, and we actually had him redo that. So it could sound quite different. He has a very distinctive voice, very low and rich voice. So it's you have to make them sound different. So he did a great job at changing the way that he read that character. And it's very salubrious and underground. So Ensor basically goes to a bar, and that's where Zedan's hanging out, drinking at a bar, and Ensor, or he approaches Zedan, and Zedan's all sulky and kind of like, yes, I'm the pilot, but don't bother me with the details. Martin did a beautiful job of Scottish pilot, which he was able, you'll hear in the chapters after this one, that he's able to really kind of make him quite delirious and quite indignant in a beautiful sort of Scottish way. And I remember Emma making a comment somewhere along the line on Twitter somewhere that she thought he was actually Scottish, and she's Scottish, so that's good, isn't it? The interaction between Ensor and Kingston is deliciously sleazy, I would describe it as. It's funny, and all the while you've got, electronica music playing in the background, and it's dark and deep and dingy, and I really like that chapter. I enjoyed making that one. So that's the end of section 3, and then we get to the 4th one, and it's still Ensor, but we've got 3 chapters of Ensor getting on Zedan's ship and then getting off at Gouda Prime. This is the first time that I sort of made a bit of an ad hoc change to the story, because there was a long period of verbage where I was talking, and to me it sounded a bit dull. So it's not that the story's dull, but sometimes when you're describing a lot of things, you've got to bridge the gap between those two things, because you can't have sounds coming if there's nothing that's explained. I might be talking about something that's associated with the scene, but it's not actually the scene, so I can't put sounds in there to describe it because it doesn't make sense. I basically used a bit of Alan's music to bridge the gap, like a ticking sort of time, tick-tock, tick-tock. And I had Martin record a bit of tannoy announcements from Zedan saying, we're going to be there in 9 hours. Or, there's a bit of turbulence. You might want to sit down. I was going to have him say something like, fit your mask on. I thought, no, that's just not space age enough. So, we'll leave that. But Martin was a very fun voice actor to play with, because he would do whatever. He never complained. Maybe he did to himself, but he always provided what I asked him to, and I appreciated that, because it meant that I could add things that I didn't see when I did the story edit. When you're writing it and when you're trying to put it together, things don't occur. So there were quite a few times where I asked some of the actors to do additional stuff, and I'm very grateful that they were willing to do it. We get to Gouda Prime, and I won't talk too much about what happens on Zedan's ship, but basically Ensor gets off and runs away into the forest. And that's the end of the 4th section. So we start now on chapter 10, which is where we first come across Inga and Blake. I remember when I first read the book being quite confused by there was a Blake there. And I thought, it's got Blake in it. Let's open the book immediately. But, obviously it's not the original Blake, because I was immediately thinking, oh my God, really? They're going to bring Blake back to life? But immediately judgmental. Wrong of me, wrong. Anyway, as we know now, that is a relative of the original Blake. There's only 2 chapters, I think, that have no characters in them. It's just narration. And one of those chapters describes Blake's backstory. And considering the climate of backstories in part 1. This is pretty in-depth. And I think it's really well written. It's touching, and it's not overly sentimental. I was able to read it in a way, I think, or I hope, that described Blake's emotions at that time throughout her younger life. And I think when it was put to music, it's very difficult to listen to. For me, it just it chokes me up a bit. Out of the whole part 1, that's the part that really gets to me. One reason I think is very clever, that writing in that chapter, is that we have throughout this whole part 1, in fact the book, right? So we've got 2 actual physical characters taken from the original story. And this is sort of another tie into the original premise. It's a link to the main character of the whole thing. And for me personally, I love it because I love Blake. So it worked really well for me. And maybe that's why it tied in so well and meant so much in that particular chapter. So we get the backstory of Inga, and it's set on X-Bar, which is good because even though when they filmed Hostage, basically it was just all in a clay pit or something, with lots of sort of cracking branches and slopes and things. The story takes us to an installation where there's a prison. Doing prisons in audio is quite, well, I want to say easy, but not necessarily easy, but easier than some other things because prison sounds are quite distinct. You can make dungeon sounds and echoing door closes and things like that, which can be prison-esque, if you like. So I remember doing that, and I added a bit to the front of the story, which wasn't there in the book, because I wanted Inga to kind of leave her unit or place of living, get in a little shuttle, and come to the prison. Whereas I think on memory it wasn't actually in the book, but I put it in because I wanted to have that running while I was telling the story. It makes the story easier to listen to if there's something going on in the background as well. So yeah, she goes to the prison, she talks to her daughter, and we first of all meet Blake, who is Neve. These 2 voices, I mean, I was fairly staggered by the way that they work off each other. Catherine's audio delivery was a bit difficult to start with. There were quite some issues with it technically, not with her voice, with the technical delivery of it. So I had to work with her to get it cleaned up. And when she did, it was great. But she has a lovely, gentle, soft voice, which I can totally relate to Inga. I thought that worked amazingly well. Blake has a really nice, rich voice, even though it's subtly rich. And as we hear later on in part 1, it can turn to steely determination if it needs to. So it's a very strong portrayal of Blake. Absolutely the right person to play it. So well done, both of you. Actually, I thought the 2 of you worked really well. And you know, Catherine's voice as well is beautifully kind of poignant at the right times as well. It's just lovely to hear, really. We have the whole X-Bar section, and then Blake gets on a space vehicle and she flies off to Gouda Prime as well. There's a nice little sojourn where you've got a panicky arrival in Gouda Prime airspace where they all think they're going to be killed, and it's very fraught and the stress is high. And this chapter brings on board Barrick. So Barrick is the pilot of the ship that takes Lou to Gouda Prime, and he doesn't have very many lines. This is the only part that Robert Torres has. But I thought that his portrayal of Barrick really brought an authenticity to it. So Neil gets to come in as this GP official, which is hilarious. But he took on like a "you will do it," like this kind of voice, and I added some effects to it to make it even more kind of like frightening. So lots of fun there too. And then we arrive at chapter 14. This is where we first of all come across Villa and Tarrant, and the listener, if they haven't read the book, suddenly realizes that the 2 original characters that we are going to see are Villa and Tarrant. I thought it was an extraordinarily good choice of characters to bring back. I mean, there was a bit of limitation, I thought. You couldn't bring Jenna back, for example, and you couldn't bring Blake back, because Blake was dead. Jenna was dead as well. You couldn't bring Callie back, obviously, because she died some time ago. you could have retained Dana and Sulin, but they didn't have so much of a backstory. Perhaps that was a reason for not doing that. I do think that the pairing between Tarrant and Villa, the way that Lou and Neil wrote them, is really good. Not that there's a surprise note there, but I never would have thought it for those two characters. And there was one point where I edited out Villa being all upset and teary in one of the chapters, and Neil came back and said, no, we want to keep that in because we wrote him specifically like that. I only took it out because it wasn't necessarily, to me, in character with the original Villa. But once I realised that they'd done it for a reason, it was no problem. This is what collaboration is, isn't it? So we see Tarrant and Villa, we get a bit of a backstory for them and what's happened to them since Gouda Prime. And again, I was able to, because of the way that the story was written, there was indication in the story of Tarrant having a dream. And it indicated to me that he was having a lot of bad dreams and that they were recurring and that he was a bit tormented by it and that it was nothing new to him, but it was still horrible. Martin had said at some point that he really enjoyed reading the emotional side of Villa. I sent him an email with some suggested lines which were based on what Lou and Neil had written, but that Villa would be speaking in Tarrant's dream instead of me describing it as the narrator. I thought that would be much more effective, and I think it ended up that way. So we have a dream sequence where Tarrant's dreaming, and he can remember Villa waking up and being all upset because he's surrounded by his friends who are dead, basically, or not dead. Just very, very upsetting scene for Villa. And Tarrant was a bit out of it. We were able to keep Tarrant as the character away from the emotion, whereas Villa could basically be the emotional side of that story. That was fascinating to do, and it worked really well, I thought. But it was a lot of messing around, actually, with the audio to do that. Villa and Tarrant are kind of going out on a foray. Villa's still drinking out of his... Well, he now has a hip flask, which is not something he had in the series, but I can totally see where he would get that from and have it tucked away in his breeches somewhere. But yeah, still drinking from this thing regularly. And I think, I'm pretty sure Martin is slurring at some points as well, which is quite fun. They are living in a buried troop carrier, which I did work on quite a bit to work out how that was going to be portrayed. Again, there's a lot of descriptives in there about how it's all in place. And I added a background sound which was sort of reminiscent of a space age or science fiction generator, which they must have used to generate power and to operate water generating machines or whatever they had. It's not all mentioned, but they must have had a way of generating water. They do mention there's cleaning and toilet facilities and things like that. So they would have needed a generator for that and the lights and power. That was a lot of fun to do that because I'm again able to use Villa's alcoholism to describe the sounds he made, and he's pretty much snoring all the way through one of the chapters, which is just a crack up. I don't know why. I can't listen to people snoring without laughing. So I laughed a lot in the time of generating that one. I'll probably laugh now and I'm reminiscing over it. But moving on. So we are introduced to these guys, and then they discover that there's something going on in Plantation 12. And I think various plantations are mentioned throughout. I forget the details in the actual episodes, but I know that in one of the stories I did an audio for recently, Plantation 7 is mentioned. So if I went on 7 Cyclopedia, I probably would look up where all plantations are. But yeah, so the guys get on a space hopper, I think, or a space cycle. It's like an airborne motorbike. And they get on this thing and they vroom off to discover what's happening. And so we come to this section of the story, which has Ensor and Villa and Tarrant and Blake all kind of like getting together or coming together in the Gouda Prime forest. And there is also, for a very short time, an Alta and the 2 guards. As well as Aurak, of course, buzzing away in the background or not, depending on whether I decided to turn him on or off. I did find that Lou and Neil didn't necessarily specify when Aurak was on or off, which is good because that meant that I could turn him on or off depending on what I wanted to take preference. Sometimes if you've got Aurak buzzing away in the background, it's distracting. So I was able to turn him off or turn him on or just lessen the sound, depending. We are now in the forest and they're discovering each other, and Tarrant at some point walks up behind Blake and says, "What the hell are you doing here? Who are you?" That kind of thing. And I had to play with the voices a bit because there's some inconsistencies really in the way that the voices are portrayed. I think that Lou and Neil wanted more of a whispering when Tarrant first comes on the scene, when Blake first meets him. But he wasn't whispering in terms of the rest of the dialogue that was going on. Matt didn't read it as whispering anyway, but he read it in a low voice, and I think that if he had done it as a whisper, I'm not sure that would have worked effectively. As it happens, we were able to compromise a little bit between Lou and Neil and myself, where I just lessened the volume, and then so Tarrant says that line at the end of one scene, and then he says it at the beginning of another, so we have to repeat it. And I had to think of, these guys are kind of like skulking in the woods at the edge of the clearing while there's other stuff going on. So I just had to move people around in the scenes to make sure that you could tell where they were, and by the volume of their voice and by the stereo panning, which is where you hear someone moving from the left to the right of the scene in front of you, which is quite useful when you're making audios like this where people are moving around and they're not just sitting in one place. We get to the end of Chapter 19, and they have... Oh, yeah, I've got to talk about this. There was a fight between Tarrant and Ensor, where Ensor gets on his ship that he's stolen from Zedan, but the Outer has ordered it to be destroyed. So basically it's been ransacked inside and sabotaged, really. But for some reason, Ensor runs into the ship and tries to close the door to stop the others from getting in, thinking he's going to take off. But he doesn't seem to notice that everything around him is kind of like trashed, which is quite amusing. Maybe he was stressed, poor boy. So Tarrant gets on board, and Tarrant, being a pilot, notices this before Ensor does. Tarrant's like, "What, you're leaving without us? That's a bit rude." And Ensor's like, "I don't have to worry about you. You guys have nothing to do with me. I don't care about you. Leave me alone," kind of thing. It's funny dialogue, actually. And I had to get them both to re-record that line because I thought, well, it needs to be much more of a struggle, right? You're basically fighting each other, so it needs to be lots of, like, grunting and groaning and huffing and puffing. And when I put it all together, I was just like, oh my God, it's fantastic. Really, really good interaction between the two. There's lots of interaction between the characters in the last 2 chapters. They're sort of getting to know each other. Lots of argy-bargy and bantering, and they're all kind of like appealing to each other. So in the end, they end up teleporting, and the last part of it is the fact that they have teleported off Gouda Prime. So Gouda Prime is no more. That's the end of the chapter synopsis for those of you who are still with me. But I did want to just record, even if I don't end up doing anything with this recording, I wanted to record what I thought of making this part. It's been a tremendous privilege, and I'm going to carry on with part 2, assuming I don't get kicked out by the authors, and we can carry on and make more of this. I actually already have most of the audio from the characters, the actors. So, although my own characters are dragging the chain, but that's a different recording. So, thank you for listening, and thank you for having me along for the ride. I appreciate it very much, and I'm humbled by the experience. Thank you.
Matt, you idiot, you should have checked the script beforehand, oh no.
The expansion that had been achieved through a rhythm, blah 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 blah. This is going well.
Your initial assessment of the requirements was, and I quote, a simple pickup mission. A team of 3 mutoids, as they were dispensable, aboard a can't even say standard.
The grey stone apartment building. La. It's raining. Is that going to come through? An intensely capitalist economy for the last 30 years. I'm going to start again.
What are my chances of getting on and off GP alive if I have valid codes?
The rule of law was disbanded with a general
Zedan pointed at a young table. A young table.
You may come along, slightly restrained, of course. Baboo.
Her relatively luxurious...
But I need to believe there may just be a way off this godforsaken rock. And today may... And today...
Even with the passage of 3 decades. That's a mistake.
Yes, Villa, I would say a mistake. My apologies.
Well, that's bloody hard to say, isn't it? Jeez.
I did 3 extra takes of that because I realized I read the line wrong. I don't know why I'm justifying this. You probably figured that out already.
It's all a bit hazy, but I recognised the one of them that was in the there.
Was that a bit too theatrical? Yeah, I'm going to stick with it.
Maybe that's what I did with the other bloody recording. Didn't turn the on.
The Outers, well, they were the servants of an alien computer system called the System. In fact, it was a system of systems. Sorry about the cock-ups.
You seemed intent on interrogating the...
There is something far more powerful than a normal ship out there.
And you also know Deras is not going to be a happy psychopath if we don't return his passport. Not passport, transport, right? My abject apologies.
Oh my god, it's over.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, a Scotsman is a Scotsman runs out of air. Och, jings man, I'm dead.